Section 5 of the Public Orations of Demosthenes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Public Orations of Demosthenes, translated by Arthur Wallace Pickard. The Olynthiac Orations, 1 through 3. Introduction. It has already been noticed that when Philip took Amphipolis in 357 BC, the Olynthians made overtures to the Athenians, with whom they had been at war for some years, and that being rejected, they became allies of Philip, who gave them Anthemus and Podiadae. In 352, alarmed at Philip's growing power, they once more applied to Athens. Peace was made, and negotiations began with regard to an alliance. In 351, Philip appeared in the territory of Olynthus. He did not, however, at once carry the invasion further, but took pains during this year and the next to foster a Macedonian party in the town. In 349, Philip virtually declared war on the Olynthians by demanding the surrender of his stepbrother Aridaeus, who had taken refuge with them. The Olynthians again appealed to Athens. An alliance was made. Chares was sent with 30 ships and 2,000 mercenaries, but seems to have mismanaged the war by misfortune or by design. Probably he had been badly supplied with funds, and instead of helping Olynthus, resorted to acts of piracy to satisfy his men. The Macedonian troops proceeded to take Stagiaira and other towns of the Olynthian League, though Philip still professed to have no hostile intentions against Olynthus. Chares was recalled and put on his trial, and probably in response to a further message from Olynthus, Charidemus was transferred thither from the Hellespont. With a considerable mercenary force at his disposal, Charidemus overran Pallena and Boeotia, and did some damage to Philip's territory, but afterwards gave himself up to dissipation in Olynthus. In the meantime, some of the Thessalians had become restless under Philip's supremacy, and he was obliged to undertake an expedition to suppress the revolt and to put down Piatolus, who had apparently become tyrant of Pherae once more, though he had been expelled in 352. But early in 348, he appeared in person in Chalkidiki and took one after another of the towns of the League, including Mesirberna, the port of Olynthus, and Torone. He thrice defeated the Olynthians in battle, and at last obtained possession of Olynthus itself by the treachery of Euthycrates and Lasthenes, the commanders of the Olynthian cavalry. Athens had probably been occupied during the early part of the year with an expedition which she sent against the advice of Demosthenes to help Plutarchus of Eretria to repel attacks which were partly, at least, instigated by Philip, and in consequence she had done little for Olynthus, though on a request of the Olynthians for cavalry she had ordered some of those which had been sent to Evia to go to Olynthus, and these may have been the Athenians whom Philip captured in that city. The 17 ships, 2,000 infantry, and 300 cavalry, all citizens, which Athens dispatched under Chares, in response to a last urgent appeal from Olynthus, were delayed by storms and arrived too late. Philip entirely destroyed Olynthus and 32 other towns, sold their inhabitants into slavery, brought the whole of Chalkidiki within the Macedonian Empire, and celebrated his conquests by a festival in honor of the Olympian Zeus at Dium. The first Olynthiac oration was delivered before Olynthus itself was attacked, or any other towns actually taken, and both the first and the second before the discontent with Philip and Thessaly had taken an active form. Both, that is, belong to the summer of 349, and the situation implied is very much the same in both. The first was perhaps spoken when the Olynthians first appealed to Athens in that year, before the mission of Chares. The second to counteract the effect of something which had caused despondency in Athens, possibly the conduct of the Athenian generals or the account given by other orators of Philip's power. In both, Demosthenes urges the importance of resisting Philip while he is still far away, and of sending not mercenaries, but a citizen army, and while hinting at what he regards as the true solution of the financial difficulty, proposes a special war tax. The solution, which he thinks the right one, is more explicitly described in the third Olynthiac, spoken probably in the autumn of the same year, and certainly at a time when the situation had become much more grave. The root of the financial difficulty lay in the existence of a law which prohibited, evidently under severe penalties, any proposal to devote to military purposes that portion of the revenues which constituted the festival or rhetoric fund, and was for the most part distributed to the citizens to enable them to take part in the public festivals, and so join in fulfilling what was no doubt a religious duty as well as a pleasure. This particular form of expenditure is stated to have been introduced by the demagogue Agirios in 394, when it revived in an extended form a distribution of theater money instituted late in the 5th century by Cleophon. But the special law in question appears to have been of recent date, and was almost certainly the work of Evolus and his party. Demosthenes himself proposes an extraordinary legislative commission to repeal the mischievous laws and leave the way clear for financial reform. At the same time, he attacks the whole policy of Evolus, charging him with distributing doles without regard to public service, adding to the amenities of Athens instead of maintaining her honor in war, and enriching her politicians while degrading her people. The main object of the speech was unsuccessful. And just about this time, though whether before or after the speech is disputed, Apollodorus proposed that the people should decide whether the surplus revenues should go to the festival fund or be applied to military purposes, and was heavily fined for the illegality of the proposal. The three Olynthiacs rank high among the orations of Demosthenes. Some passages, indeed, show that he had hardly as yet appreciated the genius of Philip, or the unlikelihood of his making a false move either through overconfidence or because he had come to the end of his resources. But the noble patriotism of the speaker, the lofty tone of his political reflections, the clearness of his diagnosis of the evils of his time, and the fearlessness of his appeal for loyal and united self-sacrifice are nowhere more conspicuous. End introduction. The first Olynthiac. I believe, men of Athens, that you would give a great sum to know what policy in reference to the matter which you are now considering will best serve the interests of the city. And since that is so, you ought to be ready and eager to listen to those who desire to give you their advice. For not only can you hear and accept any useful proposals which a speaker may have thought out before he came here, but such, I conceive, is your fortune, that the right suggestion will often occur to some of those present on the spur of the moment, and out of all these suggestions it should be easy for you to choose the most advantageous course. The present time, men of Athens, seems almost to cry aloud that you must take matters into your own hands yonder, if you have any interest in a successful termination of the crisis. And yet our attitude appears to be, I do not know what. My own opinion, at all events, is that you should at once resolve to send this assistance, that you should prepare for the departure of the expedition at the first possible moment. You must not fall victims to the same error as before, and that you should dispatch an embassy to announce our intention, and to be present at the scene of action. For what we have most to fear is this, that he, with his unscrupulous cleverness in taking advantage of circumstances, now it may be by making concessions, now by uttering threats, which he may well seem likely to fulfill, now by misrepresenting ourselves and our absence from the scene, may turn and wrest to his own advantage some of the vital elements of our power. And yet it may fairly be said, men of Athens, that our best hope lies in that very circumstance which renders Philip's power so hard to grapple with, the fact that the entire control over everything, open or secret, is concentrated in the hands of a single man. that he is at one and the same time general, master, and treasurer, that he is always present in person with his army. All this is a great advantage, insofar as military operations must be prompt and well timed. But as regards the compact which he would so gladly make with the Olynthians, the effect is just the reverse. For the Olynthians know well that they are not fighting now for honor and glory, nor for a strip of territory, but to avert the devastation and enslavement of their country. They know how he treated those who betrayed to him their city at Amphipolis, and those who received him at Pydna. And it is, I imagine, universally true that tyranny is a faithless friend to a free state, and that most of all when they occupy adjoining territories. With this knowledge, men of Athens, and with all the reflections that the occasion calls for in your minds, I say that now, if ever before, you must make your resolve, rouse all your energies, and give your minds to the war. You must contribute gladly. You must go forth in person. You must leave nothing undone. There is no longer any reason or excuse remaining which can justify you in refusing to do your duty. For everyone was but recently harping on the desirability of exciting Olynthus to war with Philip, and this has now come to pass of itself, and in the way which most completely suits your interests. Had they taken up the war because you had persuaded them to do so, their alliance might perhaps have been precarious, and their resolution might only have carried them a certain way. But now their detestation of Philip is based upon grievances which affect themselves, and we may suppose that a hostility which is occasioned by their own fears and sufferings will be a lasting one. Since, therefore, men of Athens, such an opportunity has been thrown in your way, you must not let it go, nor fall victims to the mistake for which you have often suffered before. If, for instance, when we had returned from our expedition in aid of the Evians, and Hierax and Stratocles came from Amphipolis and stood upon this platform and urged us to sail and take over the city, if, I say, we had continued to display in our own interest the eagerness with which we displayed in the deliverance of the Evians, you would have kept Amphipolis then, and we should have been free from all the trouble that we have had since. And again, when news kept coming of the investment of Pydna, Potidae, Mitone, Pegase, and all the other places, I will not stay to enumerate them all, if we had acted at once, and had gone to the rescue of the first place attacked, with the energy which we ought to have shown, we should now have found Philip much less proud and difficult to deal with. As it is, we are always sacrificing the present, always fancying that the future will turn out well of itself. And so we have raised Philip to a position of such importance as no king of Macedonia has ever before attained. And now an opportunity has come to Athens in the crisis at Olynthus, as great as any of those former ones, and I believe, men of Athens, that one who was to draw up a true account of the blessings which have been given us by the gods would, in spite of much that is not as it should be, find great cause for thankfulness to them, and naturally so. For our many losses in the war must in fairness be set down to our own indifference. But that we did not suffer such losses long ago, and that an alliance has presented itself to us, which, if we will only take advantage of it, will act as a counterpoise to them. All this, I for one, should set down as a favor due to their goodness towards us. But it is, I imagine, in politics as it is in money-making. If a man is able to keep all that he gets, he is abundantly grateful to fortune. But if he loses it all before he is aware, he loses with it his memory of fortune's kindness. So it is in politics. When men have not made a right use of their opportunities, they do not remember any good that heaven may actually have granted them. For it is by the ultimate issue that men estimate all that they have enjoyed before. Therefore, men of Athens, You must pay the very utmost heed to the future, that by the better use you make of it, you may wipe out the dishonor of the past. But if you sacrifice these men also, men of Athens, and Philip, in consequence, reduces Olynthus to subjection, I ask any of you to tell me what is to prevent him from marching where he pleases. Is there a man among you, men of Athens, who considers our studies the steps by which Philip, weak enough at first, has become so strong? First he took Amphipolis, next Pydna, then again Potidea, and then Mytone. Next he set foot in Thessaly. Then, when Pherae, Pagasae, Magnesia were secured for his purposes, just as it suited him, he departed to Thrace. In Thrace, after expelling one prince and setting up another, he fell ill. When he grew easier again, he showed no inclination to take things easily, but at once attacked the Athenians. And I am passing over his campaigns against the Illyrians and the Paeonians, against Erebus, and in every possible direction. Why, I may be asked, do I mention these things at the present moment? I wish you to understand, men of Athens, and to realize these 2 points. First, the unprofitableness of perpetually sacrificing your interests one by one, and secondly, the restless activity which is a part of Philip's very being, and which will not allow him to content himself with his achievements and remain at peace. For if it is to be his fixed resolve that he must always be aiming at something greater than he has yet attained, and ours that we will never set ourselves resolutely to work, ask yourselves what you can expect to be the end of the matter. In God's name, is there one of you so innocent as to know that the war will be transferred from Olynthus to Attica if we pay no heed? But if that happens, men of Athens, I fear that we shall be like men who light-heartedly borrow at a high rate of interest, and after a brief period of affluence, lose even their original estate. That like them we shall find that our carelessness has cost us dear, that through making pleasure our standard in everything, we shall find ourselves driven to do many of those unpleasant things which we wished to avoid, and shall find our position, even in our own country, imperiled. I may be told that it is easy to criticize. Anyone can do that. But that a political adviser is expected to offer some practical proposal to meet the existing situation. Now, I am well aware, men of Athens, that in the event of any disappointment, it is not upon those who are responsible that your anger falls, but upon those who have spoken last upon the subject in question. Yet I do not think that consideration for my own safety should lead me to conceal my conviction as to the course which your interests demand. I say, then, that there are 2 things which you must do to save the situation. You must rescue these towns for the Olynthians, and send troops to accomplish this. And you must damage Philip's country with your ships and with a second body of troops. If you neglect either of these things, our campaign, I greatly fear, will be in vain. For suppose that you inflict damage on his country, and that he allows you to do so while he reduces Olynthus. He will have no difficulty in repelling you when he returns. Suppose, on the other hand, that you only go to the help of Olynthus. He will see that he has nothing to fear at home, and so he will sit down before the town and remain at his task, until time enables him to get the better of the besieged. The expedition, therefore, must be large, and it must be in 2 parts. Such is my view with regard to the expedition. As to the sources of supply, you have funds, men of Athens, funds larger than anyone else in the world. But you appropriate these without scruple, just as you choose. Now, if you will assign these to your troops, You need no further supplies. Otherwise, not only do you need further supplies, you are destitute of supplies altogether. Well, does someone say, do you move that this money should form a war fund? I assure you that I make no such motion, for while I do indeed believe that a force ought to be made ready, and that this money should form a war fund, and that the receipt of money should be connected as part of one and the same system with the performance of duty, you, on the contrary, think it right to take the money after your present fashion for your festivals and spare yourselves trouble. And therefore, I suppose, only your resource is a general tax, larger or smaller, according to the amount required. In any case, we need funds, and without funds, nothing can be done that we ought to do. Various other sources of supply are suggested by different persons. Choose whichever you think best of these, and get to work while you have the opportunity. It is worthwhile to remember and to take into account the nature of Philip's position at this moment, for neither are his affairs at present in such good order, or in so perfectly satisfactory a state as might appear to any but a careful observer, nor would he ever have commenced this present war if he had thought that he would really have to fight. He hoped at first that by his mere advance he would carry all before him, and he has since discovered his mistake. This disappointment, then, is the first thing which disturbs him and causes him great despondency. And next there is the disposition of the Thessalians, naturally inconstant as we know it has always been found by all men, and what it has always been, that in the highest degree Philip finds it now. For they have formally resolved to demand from him the restitution of Pagasae. They have prevented him from fortifying Magnesia, and I myself heard it stated that they intend even to refuse him the enjoyment of their harbor and market dues for the future. These, they say, should go to maintain the public administration of Thessaly, instead of being taken by Philip. But if he is deprived of these funds, the resources from which he must maintain his mercenaries will be reduced to the narrowest limits. Nay, more, we must surely suppose that the chieftains of the Paeonians and Illyrians, and in fact all such personages, would prefer freedom to slavery, for they are not accustomed to obey orders, and the man, they say, is a bully. Heaven knows there is nothing incredible in the statement. Unmerited success is to foolish minds a fountain head of perversity, so that it is often harder for men to keep the good they have than it was to obtain it. It is for you, then, men of Athens, to regard his difficulty as your opportunity, to take up your share of the burden with readiness, to send embassies to secure all that is required, to join the forces yourselves, and to stir up everyone else to do so. Only consider what would happen if Philip got such an opportunity to strike at us, and there was war on our frontier. Can you not imagine how readily he would march against us? Does it arouse no shame in you that when you have the opportunity, you should not dare to do to him even as much as you would have to suffer were he able to inflict it? There is a further point, men of Athens, which must not escape you. I mean that you have now to choose whether you are to carry on war yonder, or whether he is to do so in your own country. If the resistance of Olynthus is maintained, you will fight there, and will inflict damage on Philip's territory, while you remain secure in the enjoyment of this land of your own which you now possess. But if Philip captures Olynthus, who is to hinder him from marching to Athens? The Thebans? It seems, I fear, too bitter a thing to say, but they will be glad to join him in the invasion. The Phocians? They cannot protect their own country unless you go to their aid, or some other power. But, my good sir, you say, he will not want to march here, And yet it would be one of the strangest things in the world if he, when he has the power, he does not carry out the threats which he now blurts out in spite of the folly that they show. But I suppose that I need not even point out how vast is the difference between war here and war in his country. For you had to camp outside the walls yourselves for only 30 days, and to take from the country such things as men in camp must have. And I am assuming that there is no enemy in the country. I believe that the loss your farmers would suffer would exceed your whole expenditure on the war up to the present time. What, then, must we think will be the extent of our loss, even if war comes to our doors? And besides the loss, there is his insolence and the shame of our position, which to right-minded men is as serious as any loss. When you take a comprehensive view of these things, you must all go to the rescue and stave the war off yonder. You who are well-to-do, in order that with a small expense in defense of the great fortunes which you quite rightly enjoy, you may reap the benefit of the remainder without fear. You who are of military age, that you might gain your experience of war in Philip's country, and so become formidable guardians of a fatherland unspoiled. And your orators, that they may find it easy to render an account of their public life. For your judgment upon their conduct will itself depend upon the position in which you find yourselves, and that may be a happy one on every ground. End of section 5.